Probably doesn't surprise you to find out his real name is not even Redstone. It's Sumner Murray Rothstein. He changed his name, I guess, so it wouldn't sound so Jewish. He's a Jewish-American businessman. You may have heard of him as the guy who kicked Tom Cruise off Paramount Pictures after jumping on the couch drama. He is 93 years of age and he is worth over $4.8 billion. He was in the OSS as a codebreaker in World War II, where he shared that time with L. Ron Hubbard, who was also in the OSS at the exact same time. Sumner Redstone's occupation is, he's done a lot of things. He's the chairman of the National Amusements, chairman of the Viacom and CBS Corporation. Let's take a look into Viacom and see what assets they own. Viacom, its television networks control MTV, MTV2, MTV Live, MTV Classic, VH1, Logo, Comedy Central, Spike, Kids and Family Groups, Nickelodeon, Nicktoons, Nick Music, Bet Hip Hop, Bet Gospel, and many more. He also owns Channel 5 and Paramount Comedy, as well as Paramount Pictures. Just going back there to what I said about him being in the OSS. So for those of you who aren't sure of what the OSS is, or just basically heard a tiny bit about them, the OSS is the Office of Strategic Services. So this was brought about in World War II and was the the first Central Intelligence Agency. It's really the predecessor of the CIA. What you learn, what's said to be taught in the OSS was how to coordinate espionage, attack behind enemy lines. Other functions for the OSS were propaganda. So, I mean, it's a pretty good foundation to then go into a mega media mogul, really. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about the CIA, which is what the OSS ended up being. The OSS, turned into the CIA. The CIA has conducted so many outrageous experiments and missions. Probably the most talked about, and you're starting to see it come through in a lot of movies now and things on Netflix. It's probably Project MK Ultra. So MK Ultra is a mind control project. Well, it was an experiment that they started in the 1950s and it was officially closed in 1973. But who knows whether they closed it or what's still going on. But when you think about mind control, you think, what were they doing? Electric shock therapy, experimenting with LSD and all that type of thing back then. But really, mind control is many things. It's the words you use, like NLP. I'm sure some of the people listening out there have gone to NLP specialists, so neuro-linguistic programmers. They help build confidence and get over anxiety, but they can also be used for, not so good things, to manipulate someone's mind, to control what they think, to sway their mind in a certain direction. And when you look at who owns all these media groups, you go, well, most of the media, 90% of the media that we see on our TV and in our papers is owned by about 6 corporations, and they all own, they own all the other smaller corporations as subsidiaries. So for them 6 people to get into a room and have a conversation and say, hey, let's do this, let's make people think this, it's not very hard. And if you got all your training by the CIA, I'd say you probably still have pretty close ties to the CIA. And that's who's really running the game at the end of the day, if you ask me. As I mentioned, Redstone was in the OSS with another well-known character, L. Ron Hubbard. And if you haven't heard of L. Ron Hubbard, I'm surprised, but L. Ron Hubbard is the founder of, or was the founder of Scientology, and he has very strong links with the CIA, and he was a member of the OSS. And if you look at Scientology, it's basically a mind control. It's just like most other religions, but he's really perfected it. Probably because he got his training doing these mind control techniques. He can work out what would work and what wouldn't work. But before I bore you too much in my talk, have a listen to one of the only interviews that he's ever given that we have video footage of to date, and I'll let you be the judge. So with that, I'm signing out. Thanks for listening to RozRadio and Rob's podcast. Have a good night, and I hope I've opened your mind a little bit.
My life's work.
Did you read widely of philosophy?
Yes, but the philosopher, of course, has spent most of his working years in his ivory towers, and he was pretty insulated from life. To really know life, you've got to be part of life. You must get down and look. You must get into the nooks and crannies of existence. You have to rub elbows with all kinds and types of men before you can finally establish what he is.
And you, in fact, did this?
Yes, I've slept with bandits in Mongolia, and I've hunted with pygmies in the Philippines. As a matter of fact, I have studied 21 different primitive races, including the white race. And my conclusions were that man, regardless of his state of culture and so forth, was essentially the same, that he was composed of, he was a spiritual being, and he was a spiritual being that was pulled down to the material, the fleshly interests, to an interplay in life that was, in fact, too great for him to confront. And I concluded finally that he needed a hand.
Now, what was the first step in the formulation of Scientology? What was the first piece of knowledge that you uncovered?
Well, that is an interesting question, because when I first entered a university, I took science and mathematics. I was forced to take this rather than philosophy, which was my natural bent. And I learned the rules of logic and the scientific approach. These things, by the way, are not generally known to philosophers. And my first effort was to find a common denominator to all men. And I had seen him in his more primitive states, and I'd seen him in his highly cultured states. And I said, somewhere one can isolate a common denominator that embraces all men. And perhaps from that we can unlock this riddle.
You mentioned just now that you discovered for yourself that man was a spirit. Are you here comparing Scientology with a religion, any religion in fact, that also sees man as a spirit?
Well, man has conceived man to be a spirit for many more years than he has conceived man to be an animal or a materialistic thing. We have a 2,000-year history of man as a spirit, whereas we only have less than a century of considering simply mud. And therefore, my study is more traditional than most philosophies. Now, when you get most modern renditions and so forth, but man poses a great many problems, and he is so varied from culture to culture, from type to type, race to race, that when I discovered the common denominator of existence and so forth, I was away, and I could go forward from that point, and I did discover that.
Can you now take us forward from this point and tell us where you went when you made that first discovery of yours?
Well, I discovered that the common denominator of existence was survive. Whatever else man was trying to do, whether he was cultured or primitive and so on, he was attempting to survive. And then one had to move forward from this point to find out what methods he used to survive, how he adapted himself to environments in his attempted survivals, and so on. And one found out that man advanced to the degree that he preserved his spiritual integrity, that he preserved his values, that he remained honest, that he remained decent. And he disintegrated or deteriorated to the degree that he abandoned these things and adopted more evil courses and so on.
Now, how can Scientology help man, universal man, to overcome the problems he faces?
Very simple. You see, we live in a world where we have governments and we have societies and so forth who are desperately trying to help man. They are trying, however, to solve his problems for him. And their efforts to solve his problems for him and so forth have not really resulted in any great advance for man. Now, the real work here is to put man in a mental condition where he can solve his own problems. And the aim and goal of Scientology is to take an individual or a group, and by taking the individuals in the group, put them in a position where they can confront their own problems and solve their own problems, and so bring themselves up by their own bootstraps. No amount of... Well, let me put it this way. Have you ever had a friend that you tried to give advice to, who then took it and went along fine? Or have you had friends that when you gave advice to them and so on, why, they rather resented it and didn't take it? Have you ever had such a condition?
Yes.
Well, very good. Let's put this on a much broader basis. If we take a man and we keep giving him advice and giving him help and pushing him along and so on, we don't necessarily wind up with a resolution of his problems. But if, on the other hand, we put him in a position where he had higher intelligence, where his reaction time was better, where he could confront life better, where he could identify the factors in his life more easily, then he's in a position where he can solve his own problems. So he looks around, he starts solving his own problems, and so he betters his own life. That is the difference between Scientology and other efforts to help man.
Mr. Hubbard, admittedly, this would seem to be both a mental and a physical approach to living in this world, to helping people to live in this world. But where does the spiritual side come into Scientology?
Well, it's very interesting. The more you try to help man physically, apparently the less progress you make. It was only when we began to treat man, and when I began to treat man, as a spiritual being who was not really dependent upon the body or the flesh, that I made any progress at all. Man is a spiritual being. He is not a piece of flesh. And when you begin to handle man on the basis that he is a spirit, that he has unlimited ability, that he is not necessarily pinned down into, like everybody has just so much IQ, and they never can have any further IQ. When we start that approach, you see, we lose. But when we say he is a spirit of infinite capability, and then we try to improve that capability, in that way we win, and we win very, very, very profitably, very easily.